All right, welcome to the Contractor Company podcast. Today, I have my friend Taylor Crane to come talk about the future of fractional work. Welcome.
Thanks, Philip. Thank you for having me.
So, you had a previous company called Clubs Poker, plural on clubs, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Poker.
Yeah.
And so that was an online app that ended up getting acquired recently. What did you learn from Clubs Poker that's influencing your kind of interest in the fractional space right now?
Maybe there are like probably two learnings I can distill from like the Club's poker journey. Both of them are about the benefits of hiring Fractional as a founder. And this is really before I knew of what fractional work was in a formal way. First learning is like I hired one of my engineers was a fractional engineer. For 15 to 20 hours a week. He had a full-time job and is one of the most like hardworking, diligent people I know, and so like structured his life where he did work for Clubs Poker between 7 and 10 a.m. and or 7 and 10 p.m. Kind of alternating days and nights, and then weekends too. He loved it. It worked really well for us, and like it was a great example of like me being able to get access to very senior technical talent that I otherwise probably would not have had easy access to. And it was the right level of investment, and it made a lot of sense. So like that's learning number one is like I actually was hiring fractional before I even knew what fractional work was. The second learning though, the biggest weakness of the company was our marketing, and it's because my strengths were not in marketing. I'm much more product oriented, and there are a number of reasons why I just like was not well equipped to like be a great marketer for this business. And I knew it, right? There was even a point where my primary initiative at the company was to teach myself marketing to then go do marketing. So like I took a course called Demand Curve, quite expensive, right? And I tried to like ramp up on like the basic marketing strategies, like everything from paid ads to like organic influencer strategies and stuff, SEO. And in hindsight, just an incredible waste of my time. There was no way that I was going to be able, as the CEO of a business, also like ramp up and become like a capable marketer.
Being an expert in everything doesn't work.
And then on top of that, like it's one thing for me to have built like the skills of like an entry level or junior or even mid-level marketer. It's another thing to like have the marketing experience to know what strategy should be implemented and what strategy shouldn't be implemented. So I'm alluding to the fact that like I should have hired a fractional CMO. And that would have been a great option or path for me to take. I didn't take it, and it is like our. So the story of Clubs is like, so we ended up selling, but like in large part we weren't able to raise our seed round because growth was good but not great. And growth was good because we had a really solid organic SEO strategy that was like half accidental. But like we had no other ways of acquiring users, and I do wonder like if I had a capable marketing leader, what would that story have been? I don't know.
So at that point, your options were bring in a full-time marketer or do it yourself, and you chose to do it yourself, assuming full-time was going to be too expensive. And now it seems like the idea of fractional work is there's a third option that's halfway in between. Could you give me like, what do you define as fractional work? Because this first engineer you had was moonlighting. So he had a full-time job. He was working part-time. What do you define nowadays as fractional work?
So I say that fractional work is part-time work, typically paid on a monthly retainer, and performed by experts in their field. So what that distills down to basically is like someone doing less than 40 hours a week of work, take it like 20 hours or 10 or 5 or 2. They are an expert in their field, meaning they have expertise, they have experience they're coming in with. So you're hiring them to own something and do something that they are already really good at, and something that like nobody else in the organization can do, as a differentiator from like a more junior level, maybe like we might use the term freelancer to describe like someone who's sort of taking direction from someone else at the company and sort of just executing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's been kind of my experience too, where you're getting high quality talent that you would be happy to have full-time. You just don't necessarily have the capacity to have full-time.
Yeah.
And then you're able to work with them part-time. Like I was interviewing today an SEO person who for my Find AI project, we need SEO work. We don't have the capacity to bring on a full-time SEO person when we're a team of 5, but bringing in someone who knows what they're doing is really impactful because there's a lot of SEO consultants out in the world that are basic level, but getting someone who's not just kind of like doing the basic level, but it's actually going to do strategic advising on like putting together strategy, different campaigns, all this different stuff, and like testing, actually is able to work with the team long term is really valuable because so much of these things are about like this long-term relationship and kind of compounding over time. So I'm really bullish on fractional work. So now you run fractionaljobs.io, a job board. We can talk more about that. And I'm working on a fractional community called FRCTNL, fractional .xyz. And I'm also hiring fractional workers at my company, Find AI. I hired a designer through fractional jobs. And so there's like a lot of discussion of fractional going on here. I previously had a company where the hypothesis was about moonlighting. We didn't call it fractional at the time. And so I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of dig in now on like what is happening in the fractional world and where is it going? So with that, can you tell me more about fractional jobs and why you started it, what it does, and what have been your learnings along the way?
Yeah, so the basics is that Fractional Jobs is a talent marketplace for fractional leaders, for fractional talent, and the startups that are looking to hire them. And so we are tech focused, or lean towards tech startups. Tech focused is in like tech startup focused, but then we support about 10 different function areas that we help startups hire for. The big ones are marketing leadership type roles, engineering leadership type roles. Design is actually quite popular as well. And then a long tail of a bunch of other. We've done general counsel roles even. So yeah.
So when you go to the website, my initial impression is that it feels like a job board, but you're describing it as more of a marketplace. Can you help me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is fair. So it's funny, like, and this is something that we can dive deeper on. If you go to the website today, the tagline is the job board for fractional work. When I launched it and when I was conceiving the idea, it was very much meant to be a job board in the way that we all understand job boards to be. Companies post roles, candidates apply for roles, companies will get candidates and then reach out, et cetera. I very quickly realized that a job board in the way that I just described it is not a good fit for this market, the fractional market, for several reasons, including like where the fractional market is at in its stage of maturity, but then also like who is the market, meaning like who are who are the fractionals? They're like, we tend to be leaders, tend to be folks that are mid-career plus, right? So, 8, 10 plus years of experience, and also tend to be those that are like very, very good at their job, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so, after launching the job board, it's sort of one of those things, like in hindsight, I should have known this, but like a job board's actually a pretty crappy product for both hirers and for talent. And I don't want to build a crappy product. And so that has like, not forced me, but encouraged me to pivot towards what I describe it now as, which is a talent marketplace. Now it's funny because the website still says job board, and this is purely just a function of like the business is moving faster than I'm able to update the landing page. And so doing things very iteratively and in the spirit of lean. And so I will update one day the messaging on the site, but today it still says job board.
I think it works though, because I think that it's a media strategy in a good way. Like you're saying that job boards are a crappy product maybe, but I think that 10 years ago, something like Remote OK or something like that, like there was a scarcity in finding the jobs. But now I think what you're almost pitching is this different way to work. And the product is the same. It's like a newsletter with fractional jobs in it that helps people kind of see it. But I think the job to be done is really shifted, where you're offering, instead of the scarcity being the jobs themselves, instead what you're doing is offering this like curation and almost like this education. And so I think you should keep the job board thing. I just think that maybe it's your media strategy, because someone who's interested in fractional jobs can go sign up, start to see what the jobs look like, start to see what do they pay? What do they look for? How many years of experience? And as they kind of start to get nurtured by this newsletter, then maybe they come to you and say, hey, I'm ready for actually taking on one of these jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe the job board newsletter is no longer just the getting the job part. Maybe it's more just like education. I think that's where a lot of job boards are heading, is more media and still being super valuable. But like there's not many resources out there about fractional jobs. And so if anything, you're just creating credibility that there are fractional jobs out there by having this job board.
I think you've made a series of great points, and yeah, like maybe I don't need to be so hardlined in thinking about things as an either or type scenario. There are benefits to calling it a job board, and it's also why I'm not in a rush to change it on the landing page, which is that it is very communicative of what it is. Like we all know what a job board is, whereas
Yeah.
talent marketplace, yeah. I worry that it's like sometimes a little bit like in speak, like in group speak, and like it sounds just a little bit pretentious, right?
Yeah.
And so like um there probably is a way of like finding a middle ground. I agree with the media strategy comments, of course. So yeah, I don't know what exactly how I'm going to end up describing it. Uh it's interesting to see it evolve like literally week by week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this is like a great place to be in as an entrepreneur, is like not really being sure how to describe it, but people are using it. They're getting value out of it. Like for me as a customer, I understand and you help me fill a role. So I think it's a good spot to be in. I realize it's stressful. I've been there many times of like, shit, what is this? What am I trying to sell? How do I describe it? And like founders all the time, I'm sure you're in the same boat, just really agonizing over what the homepage says
Yeah.
about a product.
Yeah.
But I think you'll figure it out. And so you described it as a marketplace. I don't know. Did you see the essay I put up about the opportunity of tech talent agents?
So I saw it. I haven't
Okay.
read it yet. I know we've talked about it a bit,
Yeah.
so you've given me some preview into it.
Yeah, what I was talking about in the article was mainly the idea that I think there's an opportunity for people to work with talent on an ongoing basis. If you look at Hollywood, like an actor has their own agents that helps them get job after job after job. Fractional work is starting to move a little bit towards that, where maybe you'll work with multiple different startups and come back to having this one agent who just helps you line up your next work or figure out things. But you're kind of describing it as a marketplace. And I think that, I don't know if these are necessarily different, because maybe we're just using old words to describe kind of familiar things, but where do you think your model is heading? Like, how does that work in terms of how you make money with talent?
Yes, there are two, or maybe even more than two ways to approach it. But the talent agent type model is one where uh, it's more of an outbound or like a proactive, aggressive strategy on the part of the talent rather, to like go out and find opportunities, right? That could be through cold outreach, it could be through content marketing and stuff. And then the flip side is companies identifying needs for themselves and then doing the same thing, doing outreach in different ways as well. I imagine that both will be necessary and both strategies will be successful. A lot of times when I think about like, what do I imagine the fractional work world to look like? Because I think that fractional is like a big part of the future of work in general.
Yeah.
I tend to just fall back on asking myself, okay, well, like how does like the full-time world work for, for hiring and such? And we see both strategies. Like we have how many job boards are out there for full-time, work. And then I remember when I was in my PM career, rarely did I rely just on, like AngelList, or it's called Wellfound now at the time.
Yeah.
I used it, but it wasn't the only strategy I used. Right. I was hitting up my network constantly. I was hitting up companies trying to network and trying to like, doing more of like, I mean, I didn't have an agent. I was playing the agent part of myself, but like, I think both of those strategies feel like necessary components of the whole ecosystem.
So then looking at kind of we'll call it the most experienced or elite fractionals today, are they having to go outbound for work, or is there inbound yet? Because what we would hope to see at some point in this market is that the best fractionals start to get inbound demand for people wanting to work with them? What are you seeing?
So from what I see, the way that most successful fractionals build their business is through a type of inbound, which is referrals.
Yeah.
So referrals that come from either clients of theirs or former colleagues of theirs in the full-time world, right? When I started doing fractional work myself, the first 3 clients I got came from inbound referrals from my immediate network. Even the 4th came from, I mean, every single one, not everyone, but like the 4th one came from an inbound from like a secondary connection as well.
Okay.
One of the inspirations from starting fractional jobs in the first place is seeing that, or at least from my vantage point, the only way to build a successful fractional practice was through inbound referrals and wanting to offer a different option that was more expensive and more, could reach a larger audience.
Yeah.
Having said all that, like I do know some fractional leaders that do have like a cold outbound type strategy or content marketing strategy. Um, I certainly have less personal experience with it. I've not done much of it myself in my own fractional work. I imagine it looks it's a very similar motion to what like agencies do and other service providers type do, like, boutique law firms and stuff, or, accounting firms. Yeah.
That makes sense. I think that there's probably like a spectrum here that we're starting to explore, which is what we're using to describe fractional today is like a very particular kind of productized thing. But as people really get further in their fractional careers, they could open an agency and start subcontracting. They could really productize their service and kind of abstract away the number of hours that they're working and kind of switching to more of like a productized thing. So I think that what you're saying is fair. And I also interpret as people might not stay as an IC forever as they kind of follow this fractional career. So the question I always get that I'm curious to get your take on is, why are these people doing fractional work? What are they doing with the other half of their time?
Well, I think there's like, what I say is like, when you do fractional work, there's always like there's a motivation behind it, right? And there are several motivations that I see commonly. One is I want to do fractional work so that I can work because I have more capacity in me than what my full-time job offers me, and I want to capitalize on it, right? So that this is someone, and I'm picturing certain people in my mind that literally want to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and feel like their full-time job was just kind of capping them, right? They have more in them. And so they're picking up like enough client work to make that happen.
Yeah.
But then I mean, for me, like for my motivation, my why, I do and have done fractional work in order to bootstrap my next startup, which became Fractional Jobs. So like I approach it from a very founder type mindset. This is an opportunity for me to stay in the game, right? So, help other founders, but then also, give myself the time and the space to start my next company.
Yeah.
And then parents is another obvious example. Like I want to spend 20 hours a week more with my kids, which is super valid.
I see a lot of the same things you see. I think it's so hard to measure productivity in knowledge work. And that's an underlying issue here in general is, for instance, as a software engineer, you could write all of your code for the day in 2 hours, or you could be lazy and have Reddit open and take a bunch of meetings and kind of piecemeal do your work throughout the day and stretch it out to 12 hours.
Cool.
And the value created per hour on a knowledge worker varies drastically. And if you're at a big company and you go from normal engineer to senior engineer, maybe your pay goes up like 10%, maybe, but your productivity goes up like far more than 10%. And so I think that my meta thinking on fractional work is that some of the highest performing people realize that the incentives are not set up correctly for people to work in a focused way. And if you're a knowledge worker where your intensity of focus matters, we talk jobs over time, and like in a car factory, you got to be at the line for 8 hours.
Totally. It's linear. The output is linear with the inputs, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But as a knowledge worker, being able to sit down and write code for 2 hours with high intensity of focus might really drain you and make you unable to work at that intensity for the whole day, but might be the best way to work.
Totally.
And so I think that there's, for me, an hypothesis here that the reason I hire fractionally is that some of the smartest people realize the kind of Sisyphean nature of just sitting at a desk for 8 hours when you can do your work in less time.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a whole group of knowledge workers that realize that if they can get their work done quickly, they can stop their work for the day, and they prefer to work that way.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like some people spend the other half of their day. Some of the people I work with, like, been parents or are road tripping.
Yep.
I work with one guy who is driving a camper van around Europe and, kind of writes awesome code in the morning. And then, like, I don't know, he does in the afternoons. Someone else, like, is writing a book and really cares deeply about that book. And I feel like what you unlock with fractional work is people that are really good at their jobs. And sometimes I think that their gems in the rough are people that love their work so much that they're spending the other half of their time doing this intrinsically motivated project kind of related to it, like hosting a podcast or writing a book or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of the coolest thing in fractional work sometimes is you find these people that love their work so much that they try to really brand themselves around it, and that they end up being just the most amazing individual contributors too.
Yeah. I strongly agree. I think a little bit tangential to that, but in the same vein, like, I think fractional work represents an opportunity for the quote unquote the worker to take back more ownership and more control over their work, their life,
Yeah.
how they want to invest their professional time and personal time. And it creates so much more optionality and then therefore probably better outcomes for everyone once like the dust settles,
Yeah.
once it all shakes out.
Yeah.
It's super exciting.
I think it's super exciting. Yeah. I got really excited about fractional work as I was traveling through the Nordics and was really thinking about the kind of, they call it the welfare states, and there's not a lot of wage differentiation there. And so whether you're a barista or a spine surgeon, your children have a very similar kind of path in life. It's they go to the same university, they can still have healthcare, all these different things. And the workers generally, there is some variation in income, but it's not the wide variation you see in the States. And as I was looking at the United States, I was seeing just how some of the people that were the highest performers in the United States were kind of getting trapped into these systems where they would incrementally increase their salaries over time, but just get held back by bullshit bureaucracy.
Totally.
And that could be that you must show up at the office at 9 a.m. for stand up. Or even if you write really good code, you're not going to perform well in this corporate environment. Or it could be that if you live in this less peak place, well, we're going to decrease your costs or what we pay you. I've been a company that like location-based pay, and
So silly to me.
It really affects the high-performing workers. And so I think my kind of overall hypothesis on fractional work is that these people who are really outstanding are hitting the edges of some of these really rule-based environments, and that they want more autonomy and more pay sometimes. But sometimes it's just straight up autonomy. They don't necessarily want more money.
Absolutely.
And so I think that there's a migration of super talented people seeking fractional work. And if you're really trying to build a standing team, that you should definitely look towards fractional work. Which leads me to my question. Is this the future of work? Is fractional work the future? What does it say about the future of work?
So, in short, yes, I think it's fractional work is the future of work, but I think probably more accurately, we would say fractional work is a future of work. It is part of the future of work, right?
Yeah.
I think a big part actually. Like I think, and to be clear, like let's scope ourselves to talking about knowledge work because I think when you get out of knowledge work, it gets a lot hard.
I think that's totally fair.
I also don't feel like an expert on anything outside knowledge work, so I can't comment. But like if we step back and let's first think about like where the 40-hour work week came from, right? From the Industrial Revolution, the Henry Ford era, made a lot of sense, in that context. We are so far past that point now. It feels to me, and I think an increasing number of people, it feels incredibly arbitrary. And when we sort of wake up or realize the fact that like that 40 hours number is arbitrary, right? it might make sense to hire someone for 30 or 20 or 10 or 5 or 2 hours a week, depending on what the needs are. So now we have the full spectrum of options available to us, which we never had before. Yes, obviously, it feels clear to me that an increasing number of companies will start taking advantage of that, right? And so, um, I think knowledge work will look very much like just a pure spectrum of work, anywhere from 1 hour a week to 40 plus hours a week. Now, I'm also like, I'm not an expert on like employment law and like the intricacies of like W-2 versus part-time versus 1099 and all that stuff. So if we like, let's just remove that for the sake of simplicity. Like I expect in the future, every hiring conversation to be like you're assessing variables that are like, okay, what's the comp going to be? And then what is the input going to be? What is the
Yeah.
like, however you want to measure it, but like how much input am I, giving in
Yeah.
here? And that's going to be just a normal part of like the hiring and contract conversation.
I think that's fair. I was reading the anthology of Bology of crypto fame,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I thought that's what you were
Horowitz,
talking about. Yeah,
and he talks in this book, or I guess this book, this kind of talks about his philosophy is that regulation holds back a lot of innovation. That Airbnb overcame regulation about hotels to make their business. That Uber overcame regulation about taxis to make their business. And do you think there's an angle here of fractional work overcoming some of the rules we put in place around employment because they don't necessarily apply in this new world?
I like feel super confident in that. At the same time, I recognize that like I'm not. That's like a very complex area that I'm not
Yeah.
like super like expert in, but it seems so natural to me that that would be the case. That like
Yeah.
because again, those concepts also are like an industrial era concept,
Yeah.
and so like it feels obvious to say that like in the near to midterm future they will be disrupted.
Totally.
And I think it's for the best, for the better of everyone. I mean, we're
Yeah.
seeing this a bit with like the gig economy, right? Like there's been a
Yes.
lot of like regulatory pushback on the gig economy. I think some of it probably seems valid. I think a lot of it is very unfortunate.
Yeah.
And I can't help but get frustrated when I see like there are regulations in New York right now around new fees for delivery drivers.
Yes.
The intention is so that delivery drivers get paid more. I think the concept is like let's make sure that delivery drivers get paid a certain minimum wage for for their working for
Yeah.
the amount of hours they're working, right? Um, and that has all sorts of second order consequences and has led to Uber Eats and DoorDash, et cetera, implementing certain like fee structures to abide by these laws, and then in doing so have pissed off a bunch of delivery drivers who have been protesting these
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah.
Like so the very so anyway, it's like that kind of stuff frustrates me because I think sometimes the intention it might be right, it might be there, but like so often it um it's not embracing gig economy work in the way that I think it needs to be for the
Sure.
future.
Yeah.
Yeah, and same with fractional. Like fractional will encounter the same or similar challenges.
So let's explore that then. So you think the fractional work is important part of future work. I agree. Let's explore some of the second order consequences.
Mhm.
What what do you think the future work is for a new grad out of college? Should they go to a fractional job or no?
This I think about this sometimes.
Yeah.
Not only so we can even layer in like the remote work conversation too,
Yes.
because like I feel so thankful that I graduated college and spent almost 10 years working in an office before COVID hit.
Wow.
Um, Now I feel thankful, but like I don't know, maybe there are amazing benefits to going from like college right into like the remote workforce. I don't know, but like there are definitely some downsides that I see. But same with fractional, like you know, going I don't know. Is the short answer is I don't
Yeah.
know. Like I think it concerns me, but it also like it sort of challenges me or excites me to think about like what does career progression look
Yeah.
like for a fraction. So like right now, for example, at fractional jobs, I have 4 team members. All of them are either 10 or 20 hours a week,
Yeah.
and some of them are on the junior side.
Yeah.
And I think about like what does career progression look like for them?
Yeah.
What is my responsibility? As the founder of the company,
Yeah.
and also like someone that like thinks and spends all my days thinking about the fractional movement. Um, I don't know the answer to this one.
Yeah.
It's hard. What do you think?
I think about it a lot. I think that I think of consultants and how McKinsey and consulting firms like that their bread and butter is people who come out of school and work for them for 2 years and then go do something else. And that's just built into the model. And I think that I could see a future where people graduating from university or even self-employed, like, I don't think that you need to go to university necessarily, especially
Also
more of a
fair.
egalitarian
Yeah.
fractional world. But I do think that there's going to be this step of having to learn how to work and probably having to move to a city like New York City, work at an office, and having arbitrary rules applied, not because the rules necessarily are the best way to work, but because you have to learn how to work before you can remix it into your own style. So I could definitely see kind of this path where people that are junior going and having to show up at the office at 9 a.m. and do stand up so that they can then go and met their own rules. And I don't think that's even too different than restaurants, right? Like, how many chefs go to Paris to work in the brigade system and learn the classic French recipes to then return home to wherever they may be from and put their own spin on it. And I think that that's probably going to look like for junior folks nowadays is
Yeah, like sort of cutting your teeth in like the more structured environments. I can also see like, let's just imagine that every job suddenly is fractional, like, which won't be true, but let's just imagine like, I could see like, types of agencies developing that are like create a more full-time structure for more junior employees, but still deploy them in in fractional, contexts.
Agencies already do that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
A lot of the agency model is almost like
yeah.
Junior folks.
I feel like there are some agency veterans that might listen to this conversation and be like, this is what we've been for decades now. What are you talking about? One more point though on the topic of like the junior, coming into the workforce. Fractional work today involves running your own business. It involves things that are not just your domain expertise. So like client relationship management, for example, back office type stuff. And I can imagine that a lot of that stuff being like learning like how to manage clients and like how to like, basics of accounting and stuff like that. And all the other facets that go into like operating a solo business. Whereas like fractional workers today, generally speaking, you have that domain expertise already. You're just learning the other stuff. So man, that sounds like a really hard challenge to like try and learn all that stuff at once. It'd be like in your chef context, it'd be like someone graduating culinary school and then just opening up their own, or being the head chef at it. It's like
having to figure out how to order.
Right?
I think that's totally fair. So let's talk about some more of the other second order consequences here. Like, what do you think are the other second order consequences of the rise of fractional work?
So here's another one that I don't know the answer to, and I'm interested to hear your take because it's potentially a negative outcome. But so I do a lot of comparing of like the fractional work movement with the remote work movement, and something that I'm seeing in the remote work world is that there's a tension between the employee who wants a remote work environment and the company who, some companies, a large number of companies, frankly, would prefer everyone be, in office. I'm certainly surprised that like post-COVID, like there is this pendulum swing back towards like the in-office type work. It surprises me personally, but it reminds me that like there is that tension there. And so I also see companies willing to pay a premium for talent that is coming into the office every day. Whether or not we agree with the premium is a different story. It is there. At least some companies, apply that premium. And so now let's think about the fractional work world. Fractional work is a very appealing and compelling concept for employees. We know that it's an appealing, compelling concept for startups and companies as well. But not every company agrees. And I do think like, will we see a type of premium applied to a salary that is a full-time salary? And because like right now the opposite is true. Like if you do fractional work today, and you meet a certain like quality bar in terms of your skill set, you will make potentially significantly more money than if you were W-2 employed.
Especially because of the tax benefits. Like the tax code is not friendly to people that make between $1,000 and $500,000 per year.
Also on top of that, do you know Ankur Nagpal, the founder of Carry?
No.
And Teachable as well? He said this, I'm not sure if it was on a podcast or something, but he said something that I'll never forget, which is the tax code is rigged in favor of business owners.
Yeah.
And technically, as a fractional employee, you own your own business. So
Yeah.
today, like, and I've done some like enough math on this to feel like reasonably confident in saying that like in the fractional work world, if you structure things correctly, you could be making yeah, as much as like 50% more on top of what you would be making in a W-2 context.
Yeah.
But now, like, the second order consequences here is that might that flip in some ways? Like, might companies
Yeah.
start applying a premium to folks that are willing to work full time because
Yeah.
so many people are more interested in doing the fractional
Yeah.
thing?
I think it's a really good thing I've been thinking about too. My kind of working hypothesis right now is that you're going to have two tiers of tech companies or knowledge work companies in general, where there's the core group that makes decisions. And then there's the second tier, which is the fabrication layer. And the way I'm thinking of building this in my own company that I'm working on today with fractional workers is I think that if I were to hire engineers and they just want to be on the fabrication layer and just write code, totally happy to have you be fractional wherever you want in the world. But if I'm hiring a PM who's going to be making business critical decisions, I think that person I want more co-located with me to be able to have the kind of water cooler conversations and figuring out strategy and stuff like that. And I think that honestly, the extent of this is I think that tech companies, what they should probably be doing is hiring PMs and giving them a cash budget and saying, your budget is $750,000 per year for your team. Go run your team however you want and be co-located with the PM, but let the PM hire and manage and hire whatever they want through fractional or freelance or anything like that. And I think you're kind of starting to see that emerge in some tech companies like Airbnb, where if you are a product manager at Airbnb, you're expected to probably show up at the office in San Francisco. Otherwise, you're just not going to be effective at your role or not get promoted. But if you're on more of the fabrication side, like you're running financial reports or something, like you don't have to be at the office and your role is more fabrication, is you can be in the middle of the desert and it works okay. I think that's kind of where things are going to head. And I think that people are going to consciously pick, like, I care about my career and want to be getting high equity upside by being on site, or I care about flexibility and autonomy and I'm going to be remote. I think that what you're talking about here is, I don't know if it'll necessarily be cash, but I think it'll be equity. That'll be a big differentiator, probably. Like, I think that if
the premium is delivered in terms of equity. Is that what you mean?
yeah,
I see.
it's like the owner agent problem, right? So like
Yeah.
the owner agent problem says that like if you're working on your own business, you behave differently than if you're working on someone else's business. And I think that the fabrication layer is going to be more of agents and treated that way
Yeah.
accordingly. Like if you want to balance lifestyle and work from a non-major place, I think that you're just going to have lower equity, but you're going to have more autonomy. Whereas if you choose to go be on site, I think you're going to end up with equity that could go to zero. Like your equity is all funny money in tech, but sometimes it's worth a significant amount of money. And I think that those are the folks that are getting more equity.
That's interesting. Like the core team versus what do you call it? The fabrication
Fabrication,
civic.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that the fabrication like can be a great place to be, right? Because you're trying to focus on a mix of consulting and fractional jobs, entrepreneurship. And I don't think you can have the headspace to be doing the strategy on-site work for both of them, right? So you're having a mix of fabrication work and strategic work almost.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think that's very. I didn't think about it. I've never thought about it in the context of like the core team versus the fabrication layer. Something more for me to think about.
But I think you're going to start to see the people that choose to be remotes and the company to have an office, that the remote folks just get less upside in the business.
And so, like, is fractional work and remote work a Venn diagram with complete overlap? Is remote work a precursor to doing fractional work? Like, can you do fractional work co-located? Probably not. Like, I think it's very hard.
I think it could be hard. I don't know. I think that if you look at kind of legacy models like lawyers or something, like I would go to the office of my lawyer in New York City. And so I do think that cities can start to become a little bit of like an in-person social network for people that are prioritizing that. But I don't know.
You would go to the office of your lawyer for a meeting, for example.
Yeah, but we would like grab lunch and like
it like, So like that's totally fair. Like if you're doing fractional work and you live in New York City and your clients are in New York City, there are tons of benefits to being able to to meet in person. One of my fractional clients actually was a big proponent of like, um, even though she's hiring fractional, like she wants those folks in New York and
Yeah.
for that reason. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
I've been
I
thinking about that with this designer we've hired, where maybe future designers, I want them to be in New York City, and we meet once a week for lunch to kind of talk through ideas, right? Because
Yeah.
like that's kind of like a part of design is just kind of like thinking of having discussions, right? This is kind of like almost like the university effect. I always think about I forget what I was listening to, some podcast talking about university professors that leave the university and how their ideas start to become less kind of refined with a paper about aliens or something like that. And the kind of effect of the university is kind of getting feedback from peers. So I do think that how you get feedback from peers does impact a lot of roles within knowledge work. And sometimes the feedback can be like pull requests and like more structure, but I think that sometimes unstructured feedback is really hard. Yeah.
So right now, I have a team member in Argentina. I have 2 team members in Nigeria and 1 team member in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
Take the guy, the DR, for example, like, so he's an engineer, like a no-code engineer,
Yeah.
and he is one of the, probably like one of those like best possible fits for what I need to do.
Yeah.
Out of anyone I can possibly think of, it would have been hard for me to draw up an even better profile.
That's awesome.
And he's, it's a pretty critical role,
Yeah.
right? Sure, I would love if he was in New York, right?
Yeah.
The budget wouldn't work for starters,
Yeah,
but for getting like the fantasy land, like he's not.
Yeah.
And I think it's to my benefit to, and I know it's to my benefit to hire it anyway,
Yeah.
right? And so it's this is something that really excites me, like the idea that like I'm no longer, or like a company, like a founder is no longer restricted
Yeah.
by the talent near them, and instead
Yeah.
can access the global talent pool.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of advantages to that.
Yeah.
And so like, um, maybe at some point in the future, keep in mind a big part of my logic right now is the fact that I'm bootstrapping and like this needs to be a very low budget operation, at least in the beginning. And so I'm actually like, I really can't hire from someone that lives in New York City.
Yeah.
But I wonder, like, as hopefully as the company grows and evolves, like, I'm not sure if that perspective will change much. I think, I think it's more likely than not that I would still favor hiring remote or just hiring the best talent wherever the hell they
Yeah.
are.
Well, you introduced me to this idea from the paradox of choice, people that choose good enough versus people.
Oh
that
yeah,
choose
this is
best.
the
Satisfice.
maximizers for satisficers. Yeah.
I think that there's a layer of that in here too, which is call it like the big Fortune 500s have a level of just looking for good enough people. You meet this talent bar, you join the team. Whereas what you're talking about here is searching for the best and looking at what you're saying through the lens of the maximizers. I think the startups out there are always trying to find the absolute best talents that they can. And my read on this is that fractional work enables you to access the best talent and start working with them, especially because employment is such a bureaucratic process to start or leave. Interviews take weeks. There's a lot of politics involved besides just pure skill to get a job. And like leaving a job is a big deal. It's not a good thing on the resume if you don't just stay at one place for a long time and work with just those people. And I think that fractional work appeals to the highest skill talent who wants to optimize their careers, optimize the things they're working on and get like a breadth of experience while being available to kind of these clients that want access to really high skill people without the overhead bullshit of interviews and interview panels and all these different things.
You've reminded me of another like amazing benefit of fractional, hiring fractional is the interview process or the lack of,
Yeah.
right? So, as both a hirer and the talent, you're incentivized to start a relationship quickly or much more quickly than if it was a full-time role for a few reasons. And that's like, okay, so if you're a company hiring, right, and you're hiring for a full-time role, you're running a pretty in-depth interview process generally.
Yeah.
In part because you want to be like extra sure that this person is going to be a great fit.
And it's hard to fire them.
Exactly. And it's hard to so like there's repercussions on making a wrong decision. Also, as with respect to the talent themselves, like you're generally recruiting them from another full-time job. They have to quit
Yeah.
their job, right? So like I mean, hopefully someone who's well-meaning and well-intended does not wanna convince you to join a company,
Yeah.
and then it's not a fit a month later, and then now you're out of a full-time I mean, it's a terrible situation, whereas with
Yeah.
fractional work, like, you can start a relationship for 10 hours a week, and the fractional is, has capacity, presumably, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe they can stretch a little bit to make it work, but you can just get started more quickly and find out
Yeah.
much more quickly if this is a long-term fit or not.
Absolutely.
And, like, how like, we talk about how, like, an interview process is it's terrible. Like, we make bad decisions all the time when hiring. Like,
Oh, yeah.
you're not gonna I think a lot of us have learned that, like, interviewing is a terrible way to assess someone's, fit in the company
I
as
agree.
opposed to just doing work.
I'm that was one of my biggest takeaways from Moonlight, my last company, was just try working with people. But on the other side, I think it also gets rid of a lot of the paternalistic controls of employment. Like, we work with a fractional engineer who said he wants to go take a few weeks to bicycle around Norway. And if he was an employee, I would have to pull out the book and say, well, you get 2 weeks of PTO and you already
Oh, yeah.
requested one for the holidays in December. And so, you owe me. But I think the fractional work is just way more fluid, where if he wants to go bicycle in Norway for a few weeks, I I want a heads up so I can do some planning around it, but I can also backfill and
Yeah,
hire really quickly and test with some other people. And so it also just feels, for the talent side, way less like the lack of rigid controls means that you have a lot more autonomy too.
totally, yeah.
You're treated like an adult. Like,
There we go,
does it
right?
feel like you're treated like an adult if you have to ask someone to take a couple of days for yourself or to go on a trip or something? It isn't like this
Yeah,
is my work
can I please have
environment.
permission to spend a week with my family?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Or like, oh, I love my children. Am I please allowed to spend some time with them? Like,
Yeah,
no, like you can just kind of manage. And I think that you have to communicate, which is always the reality of the difficulties of workplaces is communication. But yeah, so yeah, if you're saying it's easier to hire, just work with them. I think that that is also a really big benefit to the talents, that people can kind of come and go, within reason too, and a little bit more of a fluid. So what do you think it takes to get companies to start hiring fractionals more? I mean, obviously you're saying like, well, I'm bootstrapped, so I kind of need to do this. But I think that's actually underplaying the way that kind of some of the bottoms up innovation happens, which is some of these early adopters that kind of need it, but are thinking of new, interesting, lower cost ways to do things. Like, I think that that is one valid path. But what do you think it'll take to go from kind of the indie fringe to being more mainstream?
s short answer is I don't know, and I'd love to know
Yeah.
the answer, and so, interested to hear more of your thoughts here. From my point of view, what I can share is that, the companies that we work with today, that we have traction with, are already familiar with the concept of fractional, and are already, reasonably bought into it. Like, I don't think I've even tried, or I've definitely not been successful at working with a company that, I had to first convince that, like,
The merits.
yeah, and that, like, it's basically and, like, again, because I'm 6 months in, right? So I'm starting with the lowest hanging fruit, which are those that have already expressed interest. They wanna hire
Yeah.
fractional. I have a lot of ambitions and, hopefully plans to, appeal to wider and wider, kinds of companies, the messaging of which I'm unclear on, frankly. Like,
Yeah.
I think, what is it gonna take? What do you think?
I don't know, because I sold my remote work startup Moonlight in January 2020, not realizing that remote work is going to have this black swan moment of COVID. I don't think we're going to have a black swan moment
Yeah.
in fractional quite
Yeah.
like that. Although I was wrong about remote work too. But I think that what I see as a general trend in tech, with the Facebook layoffs, the X layoffs by Elon Musk, is a shift in management attitude, where in the past, management was incentivized in this abundance era of hire nonstop. And if you hire enough people, you'll get a promotion.
Mhm.
And so you have the managers who hired enough people to become an associate director, who hired people to become a director, to become a VP. And so there was this era of abundance of just hiring at all costs without having to think about the costs. But now I think that since recent kind of downturn, we're seeing more movement towards managers having to care about P&L and L and capital efficiency. And so maybe my question for you is, on the people you've seen hiring fractional, is it a pattern that they're the people who are not just having to do the work, but have to care about capital efficiency of the company?
I tend to work like almost everyone I work with are CEOs or founders, and so basically by definition, yes, they are
Yeah.
very much thinking about the capital efficiency of the company, and that is inspire that is what is inspiring them. There's another like in fact, I'm reminded of a conversation I had today with a CEO, who was looking to hire a fractional ML AI engineer, and within the first 2 minutes of the call, what he says to me is like, I have 2 options. I can either go out and hire a full-time, like, junior ML AI engineer, um, or I can go out and hire a, very senior person for the same salary for 10 hours a week, and I would prefer to hire that senior person because I have more trust that they will be able to do it right in the first time.
Yeah.
And so that's less of a budget like, budget is always a constraint in some ways, but that one is less of a budget constraint and more of like a, I I just want access to senior talent within a certain the most senior talent I can get
Yeah.
within a certain budget. And it's funny because like, that's my pitch. Like, he just basically said the pitch back to me, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, wow, you get it." Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense because when you're making an initial hire on something, it's really hard to thread the needle of finding someone that is not so junior that they can't do work alone, but not someone that is so senior that they stops doing the work themselves.
Yeah,
And that's a really difficult thing. Like if
totally.
we were hiring for a designer, it's really hard to find the designer who can operate autonomously, but is still used to doing day-to-day work. And I think that that's what the fractional work I'm really seeing is where people are succeeding is these individual contributors who could have leveled up to management, but stayed individual
Mm,
contributor. And instead of trying to manage other people, instead can really focus on their craft. But that's becoming really valued in the market, right? It's in the past, if you were a good engineer, companies would say, you're so good at writing code, you should stop writing code and try to get some people who are not as good at you to do better. Meaning, sure.
yeah.
Um, but I think that there is a path where management is not as important for a variety of reasons. That's a bigger discussion, but where individual contributor skills are valued more highly. And I think we just as a knowledge work community didn't value the outsized impact of a really good individual contributor and
Mhm.
sent them down the management path just because of the incentives that were set up. But I think that with fractional work, you're starting to see that the market is kind of saying, I care about these people and we need them outside of just big companies. We need them at smaller companies.
I think this concept exists in the full-time world as well, with the concept of, like, principal engineers, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's probably most mature in the engineering function because probably because, engineers, some of them are very vocal about not wanting to do management,
Yeah.
whereas in other functions, I guess, like, you just think of, "Oh, yeah, like, I'm a marketing function, like, eventually I'm gonna become a manager," and, like, that's I guess there's less pushback about it. But in the engineering world, it's like you have principal engineers or staff level engineers, right, that are, like, the highest level, IC you can be in, and although I don't know, like, the intricacies of the comp structures, I know that a lot of them are paid the same or even potentially more than their even their managers, which is
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
But it's quite cool to your point. Like,
Yeah.
it is probably a better, way of valuing contribution because there are few things better than, like, someone who's incredible at their craft
Yeah.
actually doing the work.
And their lifestyle on that path as an IC, as an individual contributor, is so different than their path would be on a manager lifestyle.
Totally.
So for a manager, you're dealing with communication in a lot of ways as your job and having to deal with a lot of um, politics and communication and meetings and
Yeah.
stuff like that and paperwork. Whereas as an IC, you're living way more of the lifestyle of the writer in the shed who can kind of just focus on their craft and think about one thing. And that brings a sense of mastery. And I think that it's really a clear path to mastery and that IC path that a lot of people want to go.
You remind me of a common story that I hear of why some types of folks are trying to break into the fractional world. So this is the archetype of this person is someone who, has leveled up in their career. They have gone the management track because that is what either they were told to do or they thought they wanted to do. Let's take the engineering track, for example. So they're an engineering manager and they freaking hate it and they don't want to do it anymore, right? They want to get back into, with their hands and start, aka being an IC again. Um, but they are also relatively at least senior in their career. They're making, quite a lot of money, let's say, in like a middle management type role, at Facebook. they don't really see themselves or identify with someone that's going to go back to like a senior engineer title at a company, like as a full-time employee, right? So they see an opportunity for
Yeah.
themselves to pick up fractional work, do the IC work as a fractional, right? But
Yeah.
now you're a fractional engineer, you're not a full-time engineer, and that does have like a cachet with it, right? That you are a business owner now, you're constructing
Yeah.
your life, and so it's like it comes with a certain premium, I suppose,
Yeah.
that allows people to adopt it and like feel proud about getting back on the IC train.
I think that's what you're describing there to me, I would describe as autonomy.
Mhm.
It's knowing that you can fire the client.
Yeah, yeah.
And as employee, you can quit your job, but
Yeah.
that's the incentives are just so different.
It's so different, yeah.
So wrapping up here, what is your vision of the future of work with fractional work? And what is your pitch to companies about what they're missing out on by not hiring fractionals right now?
So, I'll start with the vision question, and I'll probably just bring it back to something that I said earlier, which is I imagine the future of knowledge work will look like when we think about, like, what those hiring conversations look like, it's going to look like, every single hire, your, um companies are asking themselves the question. Actually, here's an interesting way of framing it. Okay, so um, I think historically companies have, especially in the ZERP era, right, where you have
Yes.
capital is infinite, right,
Yes.
and your goal is to like deploy capital, hire people. The way that companies tended to think was, okay, I have a need for type of marketing role. Let me go out and hire a candidate to fill that role full time.
Yeah.
And now my job is to fill that person's plate with 40 hours a week of work. Like I I have a need for a marketing role. I'm going to hire for that. I'm going to hire that person. That person's going to be W-2 full time.
Yeah.
And now my job is to make sure they are productive enough that it like sort of justifies the fact that they are full time. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna make sure I'm just giving them work, right? Even if it's busy work, even if it's not the most productive work, but like
Yeah.
you're full time at the company, like I better make use of you,
Yeah.
right? Versus
Some cost.
yes, exactly, the opposite framework, and this is what I think of as the future. To answer your question of like my vision for the future is that instead of thinking that way, I and this may also answer the second question, which is how I think companies should think, but
Yeah.
it is okay, I have a need for a role, like a marketing role, for example. What exactly is that need? How much, what am I willing to invest into that need? How many, let's say, hours a week is that need for? Are we talking like are we talking like quarter time, right? 10 hours a week, or like what is like the ideal amount of investment into that role? And if I come out of that process with this being a full-time role, then great, go hire a
Yeah.
full-time director of marketing. But if I come out of that process and decide that like actually the ideal feels like someone very senior at 10 hours a week, let's say, then I'm going to go do that.
Yeah.
And like, it's not even like a question. It's just like that. That's just part of um, the equation.
Yeah.
For every single role is how it should be. It's just a mindset
Yeah.
shift of like, not every role has to be a full-time role.
Yeah.
And like, instead, let me just approach this from first principles and say, as a founder, as a CEO, as a capital allocator, what is the ideal investment that I want to make in terms of time, money, et
Yeah.
cetera. And then whatever the output of that is what I do. And I now have a spectrum of options available to me as a result of fractional work, where I can hire someone for, 15 hours a week.
I would summarize that then as why hire generalists when you can hire a bunch of different specialists?
Oh, that's cool too. Yeah. That definitely feels like an important, and this, by the way, is coming as a generalist. So,
Yeah.
I think that resonates definitely. Like you can, that, divvy up the role into different, more specialist type roles
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
But I think that I'm using generalist and specialist in the sense of having one person, like having people work on one thing for the work, but that person could be a generalist. Strategy work is all about being general, right?
That's
Like
true.
product management is about
It's true.
thinking about the trade-offs of building versus buying
Mhm.
versus all these different things at the same time. But like that person's role can be very specialized. Of your job is just to focus on this feature. Your job is for the social media person to just manage the Twitter account.
Yeah.
Even if the person is a generalist, the role can be really specialized.
Good point. Absolutely.
And for companies, what are they missing out on by not hiring fractional?
several things are coming to mind. One that is like screaming at me is like just access to a certain caliber of talent that I just don't think you'll get access to otherwise, or it's much
Yeah.
harder to get access to. Like I I have the benefit of seeing very intimately uh the 6,000 folks in the fractional jobs network alone. And um it is it's hard for me to it's hard for me to overstate rather how incredible this talent is,
Yeah.
and how excited, ready, eager, and willing they are to work for, let's say, early stage startups or growth stage startups, uh, and like be incredible contribution to the company on a fraction of their time. Um, and I think if more companies realize that, like virtually every time, I don't want to oversell it. So like, but almost really almost every time that I send a hirer a batch of candidates that we've shortlisted for them, the response is something to the effect of like, "This is incredibly impressive," or "Holy cow," et cetera. And if more companies understood that this talent is available to them, I think I would be drowning in
Yeah.
more than I already am drowning in work.
That's my takeaway too is even if you don't understand or agree with the concept of fractional work, a lot of really exceptional talent seems to be wanting it. And so if you're seeking exceptional talent, you would be missing out if you weren't considering fractional candidates.
Exactly. And so similar to the remote work, like from just a few years ago, the remote work world, like,
Yeah.
you would be, it is a mistake for companies to think they can only hire from within their geographic location, right?
Yeah,
You're missing out on so much incredible talent.
absolutely. Well, thank you for having this chat today. Where can people find fractional jobs and anything else you want to talk about?
Sure. So, it's just fractionaljobs.io, is the website. You can find me on LinkedIn, Taylor Crane. I know there's no like handles on LinkedIn, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
On Twitter, it's Tay, letter K, and then Crane as well. Um, yeah, that's it.
If there's like a hiring manager out there who says, I wasn't really considering this, I don't know if I'm really a fit for this, but would maybe have the curiosity to just try it out, even if they're not fully committed, would you be okay with that person? Like, can that person come to fractional jobs and still talk to you?
100%, yeah. And
Okay.
so like our model is very welcoming of that, right? Like
Yeah.
it's totally free to engage a search with us. You only pay if you make a hire. And I relish the opportunities to talk to folks and like show them the benefits of fractional, and
Yeah.
I would be very excited about that actually.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show and catch you later.
Thanks for having me.